For the past few months, Microsoft and Sony have been duking it out over the fate of this Activision acquisition. Microsoft wants to buy them, Sony doesn't want Microsoft to buy them. But you probably already know that. This has been quite the hot topic. It's a constantly developing story with both companies engaging in a battle of words to sway regulators to their side. Now, I'm not gonna retread over all the details. I've already talked about this stuff many times before, both on this channel and on my other channel, and none of that is really relevant. The important thing to know is that regulators don't seem too keen on Microsoft buying up this publisher. They believe it could lead to anti-consumer, anti-competitive, anti-Call of Duty practices. The FTC has made their position quite clear, and it's starting to look like there's at least a chance that this whole thing might just not happen. Now, I'm not saying the deal is done. Microsoft can still fight this in court, nothing is set in stone. It's just the odds of it getting passed are slightly less than they were before. And this got me thinking, what if the Microsoft Activision deal doesn't get approved? What if it gets struck down? And on the surface, that seems kinda silly. Like, so what? Crash Bash 2 ain't coming to Game Pass, boo-hoo. But I think there's more to it than that. This could get interesting. So today I ask you to indulge me while I engage in my favorite kind of speculation, baseless. And before I begin, keep in mind this is just for fun. I really have no horse in this race. I don't care all that much if Microsoft gets Activision or doesn't get Activision. I'm not a lawyer. This is not financial advice. I have no idea what's going to happen. Okay? Okay. Microsoft made a statement when they announced their intentions to buy Activision Blizzard. It's the largest proposed deal in gaming history, absolutely dwarfing not only Microsoft's previous acquisitions, but everything else. It's a lot of money, more than the value of all these publishers combined. But they chose Activision Blizzard, and for a good reason. They have a lot of valuable IPs. COD or no COD, Microsoft would still guarantee a bunch of exclusives on Xbox in the long run. These would provide a consistent stream of compelling titles for Game Pass, boosting the number of subscriptions along the way. But also, we can't forget Activision's part in all this. Publishers are less likely to want to sell their company if things are going great, and things were not going great for Activision. With everything that was going on, they probably would have been willing to take an offer from anybody with enough cash. And I'm sure Microsoft saw Activision's willingness to sell as both an opportunity and a potential headache if some other company made an offer. Back in 2020, head of Xbox Phil Spencer stated that he didn't view Sony as the main competitor to Xbox. Amazon and Google, they were the real threats. Now that might sound kind of weird now, but at the time, it was a good take. Both of these companies were showing interest in the gaming industry, and there was a legitimate concern that they might simply buy their way in. People were scared that they were going to try to consolidate or dominate the market. Considering the fact that after the Activision allegations came out, several companies approached Activision for a buyout, these fears were pretty legitimate. It's not hard to imagine that Microsoft went after Activision as sort of a preemptive strike against other tech giants. But as time has gone on, none of these Google-Amazon takeover concerns really panned out. Google's gaming ambitions pretty much ended with Stadia's failure, and Amazon really hasn't pushed for much beyond publishing individual titles. I mean, they have this thing, but have you ever heard of it? Without the threat of big tech, this deal started to make a little bit less sense. I mean, throw in the concessions of COD exclusivity, and it makes you wonder whether this is really worth $70 billion. And if this was just about exclusives or Game Pass or even Xbox, I don't think it would make sense. But the real moneymaker here is the mobile games. Oh boy. For somebody that's entrenched in modern gaming, it's easy to look at Activision Blizzard as COD or Overwatch or Diablo or Spyro, but in reality, the most valuable thing this company has is its mobile games. King and COD Mobile and Diablo Immortal. This stuff makes more money for Activision Blizzard than the console and PC markets combined. Mobile games are generally cheaper to make than AAA console or PC titles. They appeal to a broader audience, and through the magic of microtransactions, they can generate a lot of revenue, which means maximum profits. Normally, I just kinda ignore this part of the Activision Blizzard deal because I don't have that much interest in mobile games. It seemed kinda odd to me that Microsoft was gonna spend this kind of money for Candy Crush, but Phil Spencer seems to back all this up. According to him, the deal really is just about phone games. I've dismissed this in the past, thinking it was some PR statements to try and convince regulators to pass the deal, but it seems true. As Phil puts it, and I'm paraphrasing here, while the console market is healthy today, it really hasn't shown that much growth. It's unlikely the number of people playing games on console will significantly increase in the next decade. The mobile gaming market, however, is growing. It might sound like Phil is doing the whole consoles are done for thing that was parroted by journalists a decade ago, but it's not the same thing. It's not like the success of mobile is directly linked to the fall of console gaming, it's just that this has more potential growth. And Microsoft is pretty much a no-name when it comes to phone games. If Microsoft wants to be an actual player in the overall gaming market, I suppose they do need to be a part of this, even if I don't like it. And Activision Blizzard King is about the biggest mobile game maker they could get, other than the ones they can't get. I should also mention Microsoft's intentions to possibly launch their own third-party mobile app store. Yes, one to compete with the likes of Google and Apple's app stores. Which sounds silly, right? There's no chance Apple is ever going to allow something like this on their phones. But in the past few years, there's been talk of new laws and regulations that would force companies like Apple to allow these storefronts on their platforms. Regulations that may have been influenced by Microsoft, since Apple denied the Xbox Cloud Gaming app. The EU seems to have passed this already, and the effects of that should come to fruition in the near future. Similar proposals have been made in the US. Now, Microsoft's Super app seems early in development, and it's uncertain whether it would actually see the light of day. But with this Activision Blizzard acquisition, they could just take these games off the existing app stores, put them on the Microsoft App Store, and you'd see a pretty massive user base instantly pop up. Now, I don't know if any of that will actually happen, but it's a possibility. Now, the reason I've been avoiding that initial question and giving all this context is to make it clear that this deal is about more than just the Xbox brand. If this was simply a way to boost Game Pass subscriptions or to gain market share in console gaming, Microsoft would have fought tooth and nail to avoid those Call of Duty concessions, and they certainly would not have offered the game on PlayStation Plus. So that statement of Amazon and Google were the real competitors to Xbox rather than Sony hasn't aged particularly well. I mean, maybe it's still true, but it was Sony who managed to convince regulators that this deal shouldn't pass. They spent the last few months arguing that Microsoft's acquisition could lead to anti-competitive practices, while they themselves were exploiting the same anti-competitive practices. I'm not saying Microsoft's right and Sony is wrong here. Both sides have made good and terrible points in this debate, but it definitely shows that Sony has had more influence than Microsoft assumed. I can't imagine the relationship between these two companies being too cordial after all this, which leads me back to that original question. What happens if the deal falls through? I have a few scenarios in mind. Some are realistic, some are less realistic, and some are even less realistic than those. The first one is the persistent fill timeline. This is under the assumption that Microsoft does not give up with their acquisition ambitions. Who needs Activision when you can buy everybody else? Okay, maybe not everybody. There are some limits on what Microsoft can and can't acquire. Any company with a massive property, an annualized multi-million AAA franchise is probably not going to get approved. EA Sports would make EA ineligible, at least in my opinion, and it wouldn't make too much sense considering the deal Microsoft and EA has right now. No Epic Games, Fortnite's too big, Unreal Engine too important, and Sony and Tencent investments. I don't know if that really matters that much. It's not majority ownership, but you get the point. GTA strikes Take-Two off the list, and obviously no PlayStation, Nintendo, or Valve, or Tencent if you wanted to throw them in there. I don't really like speculating on who Microsoft might buy next because nobody really knows. It's important to remember that just because Microsoft has the money to buy a publisher and that deal could be approved by regulators, that doesn't mean the publisher is willing to sell. I could list off every company I don't think they're going to buy, but that's a long list. Whoever they buy next, it might not be very interesting. Or it is. I'm future-proofing this. The next scenario is in regards to Activision. Once all of this is over, they're free to get bought up by anybody. Now, this doesn't mean Sony is going to buy Activision, but Amazon, Google, Apple, maybe Meta, not Tencent, for obvious reasons. But even still, I'm not seeing this happening. The main concerns of this deal weren't really about monopolies or large market share. I could be completely off base here. Maybe it is just the fact that Microsoft had an established presence in the gaming industry. But I'm pretty sure regulators just wouldn't let this happen. I'd expect Activision to remain independent for a good while. Next scenario is the punished fill timeline. I imagine some people, especially Xbox fans, would like to see Microsoft get revenge on old PlayStation over there. Now, this might sound silly because businesses are focused on business, on profits, but there is historical examples of grudges between companies getting personal and affecting decisions. After all, that's why PlayStation exists in the first place. In this timeline, Phil is overcome with unrelenting rage towards the PlayStation brand. He decides to crush them with his wallet. Before I get into this, I don't genuinely believe that Phil Spencer is scheming up some devious business tactics. I don't think he's a bad, evil guy, but let's just imagine this breaks him, and now he is. He's punished Phil. Microsoft hasn't been that aggressive with the Xbox brand these past few years. I mean, sure, they bought Bethesda, they're trying to buy Activision, they got Game Pass, but they never seem to stoop to the dirtiest of dirty tactics, the third-party exclusive. This is when you buy up the exclusive rights to a game that you didn't make. You get exclusive content, exclusive features, or just being exclusive to one platform. Now, I'm not referring to when a console manufacturer helps fund a game that would have otherwise not been possible to make. I'm talking about just throwing money at a publisher to get exclusive rights to an individual game in a popular franchise. In the past, Microsoft, Sony, and Nintendo, they all used this tactic quite often. In recent years, though, it's usually Sony that's doing this. Square Enix titles, Street Fighter V, 2 Bethesda games before Microsoft bought them, COD exclusive content, Silent Hill 2 remake, I'm sure the list goes on. Now, Microsoft does have third-party exclusive deals for Xbox, but they tend to be smaller in scale and scope, not AAA behemoths. There's always that question then of why doesn't Xbox do this? Why not just throw around some of that money? They could easily outbid anything Sony could afford. And I suspect one of the main reasons they haven't done this in a few years is to look good for regulators. To be able to say, we aren't partaking in these anti-consumer, anti-competitive practices, but Sony is, and this was part of their defense, citing the exclusivity deals that Sony has struck up even with its dominant position in the market. Now sure, this is just me speculating. Maybe Microsoft hasn't done this stuff because it's not the nice thing to do, but it makes money. I'm pretty sure this is why they're not doing it. Now, if Microsoft intends on buying another studio, there's nothing that will change on this front. Obviously, Microsoft wants to buy more publishers, but the question is whether regulators would even allow that. Was Activision the problem in this deal? Was it COD? Was it the fact that it's the largest Western publisher of games? Or is it Microsoft? Just by the nature of being a nearly $2 trillion company, maybe they're too big to buy anybody without appearing anti-competitive. If regulators are adamant that Microsoft can't acquire any more publishers, there's no reason to not play by Sony's rules. A bidding war would begin between Xbox and PlayStation over third-party rights. Every major game going to one platform or the other, but never both. I'm not saying GTA 6 Xbox exclusive, but that's exactly what I'm saying. This gets more interesting when you consider Activision and Microsoft's relationship if this deal fails. Heads of the company wanted to sell, and Sony will have stopped all of that from happening. I can't imagine Bobby's going to be too happy about that. But also in a few years when Sony's contract with Activision ends, Microsoft could just up their offer and get that exclusive content for COD. I mean, why not go further? There's no more restrictions on this deal, so why don't they just get COD exclusivity? The exact same thing that regulators feared the most. Activision games on Game Pass. Why not? Punish Phil could go even further, go PT on all this, remove Fallout 4, Skyrim from people's accounts, Minecraft, that's gone. Now, I don't think this is gonna happen. I should make that clear. Microsoft does have another reason they don't go all out on Sony. Big tech is the big target for regulators right now. For the most part, Microsoft has remained safe from all of this. They aren't doing the kind of stuff that Apple's doing. But if they started to go too far to push that line, even in just the gaming market, it would raise concerns. After this attempted massive acquisition, I imagine Microsoft will at least remain on the radar of regulators for a while. Even if Microsoft isn't trying to buy publishers, it's not really worth risking the old Standard Oil treatment to get back at a company that's worth like 1/20th your value. I think the most realistic scenario is the most boring timeline. Microsoft doesn't attempt any major acquisition in the future, nor any aggressive third-party exclusive AAA deals. It's hard to tell if even a smaller Bethesda-sized acquisition would be possible. Instead, independent developers are a safe bet, But they can buy smaller mobile game publishers or just make their own. There would be a lot of chaos on the internet, on the forums, as Sony would still be free to buy up studios and publishers, but keep in mind they don't have the kind of money to make any major acquisitions. Like really major, I guess. The only thing Microsoft could do to counter Sony is just get more games on Game Pass. I know, it's boring, right? The biggest ramifications from any of this, probably just gonna be the stories that people tell for a long time. This Microsoft Activision acquisition has been particularly fascinating to me. If it goes through, it could shape the future of the industry. And if it doesn't, it's a fun piece of trivia that gaming YouTubers will bring up in 20 years. Microsoft has made it clear that they have larger ambitions for gaming and Xbox than just the consoles. Whether those ambitions are realistic or not, that remains to be seen. Banjo-Kazooie 3, Android exclusive. Cost $20 to play as Kazooie.